You're not failing because you're not smart enough. You're failing because nobody ever explained what was happening inside your head. Now, most people think, or most people who fail school, they're not actually stupid, and I'm serious about it. The failure isn't about intelligence, and what's actually going on is way more interesting than most people ever figure out. Now, when someone fails an exam or completely checks out of school, the default explanation is that they're not smart enough, or they just weren't intelligent. School isn't made for them, and I get why most people think that. I'm in dental school. I'm surrounded by people who study for hours. I'm not even joking, for hours every single day, and they still fail. But I'm also surrounded with people who barely study. They barely open the books. They don't even go to the lectures, and somehow they still pass the exams. And some of them even get higher grades than me. So something else is clearly going on here, and I'm going to try to explain what I think that actually is. So there's something in psychology called learned helplessness, and it was discovered kind of by accident. Researchers put a dog in a box and gave it electric shocks. At first, the dog tried to escape, tried everything, but the box was locked, of course, and there was no way out. So eventually, the dog stopped even trying. Then the researchers they opened the box and gave the dog a way out, and the dog just sat there, didn't move, didn't even try, even though it just could just leave. It's because the dog's brain had already decided that there is no point in trying. Now, I don't know why this experiment stuck with me, but it did. Because that's exactly what happens with students. You fail an exam, okay, that doesn't feel great, it's bad. You study harder for the next exam, you fail again, you try something different, and you still fail. At some point, without you even noticing, your brain makes a decision. Now, your brain is not conscious. You don't sit there and decide yourself or tell yourself, oh, I'm giving up now. No, your brain just stops believing that what you do makes a difference with your exam results. And once that happens, it's really hard to come back from, because the problem isn't the studying anymore. The problem is what you believe underneath all of it. Now, some students, not all, but a lot of them, they fail on purpose. Not consciously, but psychologically on purpose. If you think about it, if you try your hardest studying, you study everything, you give it everything, and you still fail, who does that say about you? Or what does that say about you? Sorry. It says that maybe you're just not smart enough. And that's something rough, like to carry. It's painful. But if you don't try to study, if you don't push yourself, you don't even try, if you go into the exam without studying, without trying, and you fail, well, you didn't really fail because you didn't try, and your feelings will be fine with that. This is called self-handicapping, and research across 159 studies, over 81,000 students, found that this is extremely common. Students will set themselves up to failure before an exam just to protect their sense of who they are. Not because they want to fail, of course, no one wants to fail, but because failing while not trying is less painful than finding out they actually weren't good enough, weren't smart enough. And it works. In the short term, it does. You fail, but you don't feel stupid. You feel like you made a choice. But over time, you never find out what you are capable of because you never actually tried. And underneath all of this, there is usually a belief that intelligence is something you either have or you just don't. Like some people are just born smart and others they not. And school kind of reinforces this. You get a grade and that grade becomes who you are. You're an A student, you're a C student, you're not a math person. Now those labels they stick around way longer than they should. But here's what research actually shows. Your raw IQ is one of the most predictors, or one of the worst predictors of how you do academically, which is true, and let me explain how. What matters more academically is being able to manage your time. Pushing through hard material while you don't feel like it. You hate math, but you still have to push through it. You stay calm when the exam is coming and everything feels like it's too much. Now, those things, they are skills. They are learned skills that you develop over time. They're not talent. They're not something you are born with. So the students who been telling themselves that they school isn't for them, they're probably confusing I haven't built the necessary skills with I'm just not smart enough. And those are different things. They're very different. And then there's the system itself, the school system. Now, most schools are built for one kind of student or one kind of learner, one pace on teaching, one way of being tested, one way of showing what you know as a student, and failing behind year after year in front of everyone around you, your friends, your family, your school teachers, everyone does something to you that's very hard to put into words. You don't just miss the material, the material you need to study. You start to believe something about yourself. And that belief, honestly, is the harder thing to fix. So the reason I'm telling you all of this is because I genuinely think that most people who failed school weren't actually failing. They were just responding to a system that wasn't built for them, the school system, to small signals, year after year of failings, saying they weren't enough, to a fear that they never even had a name for. And if that's you, or if that was you, the first step isn't to study harder. No, it's to understand what was actually going on. Learned helplessness is something real, but it's not permanent. Self handicapping is real, but once you see it for what it is, it's very hard to keep doing it without noticing. You can't really fix something before understanding it. So you need to understand who you are, what works for you in the school system. Forget about the way your teachers teach you. Find your own ways that make sense to you. And that's what I did. The school system was never something for me. Now in dental school, on my fourth year, I don't really go to lectures anymore. I stopped going there because it doesn't make sense to me. I like to learn on my own. I like to watch the videos. I like to read the books. And that's what worked for me. And you need to do that as well. You need to understand yourself, and then you can start fixing things. You're not failing because you're not smart enough. You're failing because nobody ever explained to you what was actually happening inside your head.